Syria's interim president says that those behind violence against the Druze minority will be held accountable. The president was speaking after Israel carried out airstrikes on the Syrian capital, Damascus, saying it was intervening to protect the Druze. His comments come as the United States said Israel and Syria have agreed on steps to end days of sectarian fighting in the Sweida region in southern Syria.
Footage from a live broadcast shows an Israeli airstrike hitting the Syrian army headquarters in the heart of Damascus. The building, which houses the defense ministry, was significantly damaged in the attacks.
There were several martyrs and injured. Of course, there were some injured civilians because the ministry's building is surrounded by civilian buildings.
The Israeli army has released footage saying it also struck what it called a military target near the presidential palace in the Syrian capital. The display of force came after violence intensified on the streets of Sueda in southern Syria. Syrian government troops were deployed to the area to deal with deadly unrest between the Druze religious minority and Bedouin tribes. But instead of bringing calm, witnesses say the government forces have been involved in attacks on Druze civilians and fighters, and the death toll keeps climbing. Israel has been pressured to intervene by its own significant Druze minority. It says that its strikes on Syria are aimed at defending the Druze community there and maintaining a buffer zone between the two countries.
Let's bring in correspondent Felix Tomsut, who has the view from Jerusalem. Felix, the United States is saying that all parties have now agreed on steps to end the clashes in Syria. Do we have any more details on what those steps might be?
Well, Sarah, while we don't have the exact details, we do know that Syrian army forces withdrew from the area. We also know that there is an agreement to start an inquiry which would look into the violence. Whether that would be enough to prevent further violence remains to be seen. But at the same time, it seems like all sides have an interest to keep the calm. The situation on the ground remains volatile, however.
Tell us a little bit more about how likely, though, this situation in particular is to draw the line under this latest eruption of violence in southern Syria and Israel's attacks in particular, now that the Americans are involved.
Well, that's a very good question. Given the fact that Israel's own prescribed goal was protecting the Druze minority within Syria due to the demands from Israel's own Druze minority, which is a very well-respected minority in society in Israel. It seems like as long as peace will remain in Sweida and the region, we shouldn't expect more Israeli attacks in the area, but the situation remains volatile and it remains to be seen how it develops. It also needs to be said that most Druze leaders from Syria accepted the ceasefire, so there's good reason for us to believe that it will hold, but the situation on the ground, it remains to be seen whether the situation on the ground will keep up with that.
Syria's interim president has addressed his nation in a televised speech explaining why he is not seeking further confrontation with Israel. Let's have a listen.
We were faced with two choices: open war with Israel at the expense of our Druze community and Syria's stability, or allowing Druze leaders and elders to return to reason and prioritize national interest over those who seek to tarnish the reputation of the honorable people of the mountain. We do not fear war. We have spent our lives confronting challenges and defending our people, but we chose the path of Syrian interest over chaos and destruction.
And now he went on to accuse Israel of sowing division. Felix, just weeks ago, Israel was talking about establishing diplomatic relations with Syria. Now these new strikes. Is normalization still a realistic goal?
I definitely would say that the Israeli attacks in Syria and the general situation in the region would definitely take any possible negotiations between Israel and Syria a few steps back. But it is the Middle East, and things can change within a day or two. So it remains to be seen how mostly the US would take the contact between the two countries forward. But I do think that mostly the US and Syria have a reason to continue these negotiations, but it all depends on the situation in Sueda remaining calm.
How does the Druze community in Israel view all of this? Because we saw dozens of Druze crossing the buffer zone into Syria on Wednesday.
We've seen quite a few voices from within Israel, from within the Druze community in Israel, calling the development in Sweida a massacre, calling it their version of the October 7 terrorist attacks, and demanding more and more intervention by the Israeli army. While there have been no voices from within the Druze community read a ceasefire, I believe that as long as it holds and as long as the violence stops, we're also bound to see those calls stop. At the same time, as volatile as the situation is in Syria, it's also volatile in the Golan Heights, basically, on the border between Israel and Syria.
Felix Thompson, thank you. And let's get an in-depth look now at all of this. We are joined by DW Middle East analyst Shani Rosanes. So Shani, I mean, when we just look at the pace of things right now, it seems as if this latest crisis is winding down. What does this mean now for the Druze community? What does it leave them?
Well, they live battered and bruised. I mean, there's also real damages and victims. There's over 300 people that they're reporting that fell victim to the last clashes. And there's still a lot of very deep suspicion against the new regime and against the new government in Syria. And there's a lot of deep uncertainty on what the future of New Syria brings to this minority community that had somewhat of its own autonomy, mostly when it comes to security and running their own defense for a long time, even under Assad regime. So now they're in a place that they need to hope that the new Syria government and the unity that is trying to project in al-Sharaa was very unequivocal in his support to the community and their legitimate ability to maintain their status of minority and their rights in Syria in his speech overnight. So they need to hope that he's strong enough and that the new mechanism that is being built is strong enough to make that actually a reality on the ground.
That speech was really interesting to listen to. And I'm wondering, based upon what you've seen unfolding now, do you see this situation having strengthened or weakened the position of the new Syrian government?
Well, on the one hand, al-Sharaa is facing again and again the same test of sectarian rifts coming, on the surface and becoming very violent in Syria. And that for itself is a very threatening and weakening prospect for the future of Syria. But at the same time, he manages to bring down and sort of bring all sides to agree to some sort of ceasefire and understanding there needs to be a way for Syria to move on to a new reality. And everybody wants to work to make that happen, not just international forces, many of them backing now al-Sharaa as the next leader, as the new leader of Syria and whatever it takes to rebuild this country after so many years of war and devastation. So many people that are invested in making this project happen inside Syria and outside Syria. So in that aspect, despite the challenges surfacing, the ability of al-Sharaa to regain momentum and galvanizing support is helping him rebuild his stature as, and affirm his stature as the leader of Syria.
Let's talk about the Israeli involvement now in these clashes, because, it comes against the backdrop of in the past months, we had seen this warming of relations, in fact, between Israel and Syria, and now, the strikes. How do you explain this?
Well, if you ask the Druze, they were a lot of them, Israeli Druze. The Druze community is the Druze in general. It's a more minority religious sect connected to Islam. They're split between Syria, Israel, and Lebanon. And the big chunk of the Druze in Israel are very much influential. They can lobby the government very well. They're serving in the military. There's even generals. They're Druze members of the Knesset. So the pressure that they were putting on the government was very, very strong. And Israel felt that it needed to, force to to show its solidarity with this minority group, because it's been criticized by this group for not being active enough in the past when there were attacks on the Druze. But at the same time, let's not forget, it also falls in line with the Israeli strategy when it comes to its bigger defense strategy, and that is mainly securing that part of Syria, the southern part of Syria, closer to the Golan Heights, the occupied Golan Heights, which Israel would like to maintain, which also has a very big Druze community. They want to see it as a demilitarized, sort of a buffer zone almost. And so helping the Druze helps Israel in that sense. But we're seeing, as you're saying correctly, that the Israeli line of strategy on how to work around the new Syrian regime and the new Syrian government is not quite clear. And on the one hand, they were attacking the Syrian tanks that were coming supposedly to the rescue of the Druze on the first day, and then later on, they were bombing the regime again. So if you want the new government to be helping the Druze, you need to be helping the government and not working against it. So there's a lot of criticism also among the Druze that they're not quite sure where Israel stands on the long-term, strategy towards Syria and this new makeshift of a government, and what's Israel's new position when it comes to that.
You have the influence of the United States also sweeping in here. We heard the U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, speaking in the White House, saying that, they were on the phone overnight. How do you see their interests in all of this?
Well, Trump does not want to see another war, starting in the Middle East. He definitely wants to see Syria succeeding. He has already pushed. He met al-Sharaa in Saudi Arabia. He withdrew the American sanctions. He wants to see this as a success. And again, we need to zoom out again into the bigger goals of the Americans in the Middle East. The Syrians, the new regime, the new government, they are Sunni. They are more considered to be allies of the Saudis, definitely of Turkey, which is a very strong ally of Trump and this White House. So if you zoom out again, just a month ago, Israel was battling, Iran, and that was, the big Shiite devil that, in the Middle East that was prompted for all those years. And definitely Syria could be a modern Syria could be a force for the better in this new map of the Middle East. So the Americans, and Trump still very much eyeing a Nobel Peace Prize, still eyeing a bigger vision for the Middle East.
Having been nominated by Netanyahu.
Correct. So he wants to see a new Middle East and a functioning Syria, a modern functioning Syria is definitely part of that puzzle that also the Saudis are very much interested in, and he does not want to see any escalation. He doesn't want to see Israel getting even further involved in any more conflicts, and he wants to focus back into Gaza, resolving that, and moving on with his new vision for the Middle East.
DW Middle East analyst Shani Rosanas, as always, thank you.
You're welcome, Sarah.